Ba 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 da ba 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 da da. This is Carcur Gold with Bleach Revisited, episode 11, in which we will be revisiting Bleach, reading through the chapter 11, and doing an analysis or response, as well as foreshadowing, talking about how it connects to the manga at large. So if you're interested in those other parts more than the reading, feel free to hop ahead. If you're here for the whole thing, keep on keeping on. As always, this is unscripted show done for Bleach fans new and old. So no matter what your familiarity with Bleach is, this is the place for you. But without further ado, let's start that reading. Substitute Soul Reaper? Well, your soul does smell awfully good. Crap, I screwed up. Chapter 11, Bleach Bombs and Mom. When you two split up, I should have gone after you. Ichigo. Too slow. Bleach, Chapter 11, Bleach Bombs and Mom. So you're a real Soul Reaper. On the way here, I saw those little things on Chad's birdcage. I figured they were his, so I got rid of them. Be careful, those leeches those things spit out are bombs. Bombs! So that's why Chad wouldn't move. And you were by yourself. Punk! You made Karen cry. You terrorized my friends. You attacked a defenseless woman. You're a 4-star wanker. Thanks. Now, this wanker is going to eat you. Huh? Ichigo? What happened? Chad! You're just in time. Take that parakeet and hide it somewhere safe. But new girl, what's wrong with Ichigo? Don't worry. Ichigo's just fighting the demon. Good idea. If they spit out leech bombs, kill them before they could spit, right? But you overlooked something. The leeches that fall from their guts are still bombs. Oh yeah, score another Soul Reaper. Huh? There's one thing I want to ask you. The parents of the boy and the parakeet, did you kill them? What? Yuichi, what did you just say? They said it was all my fault. You and that man got hurt because of me. Yuichi. Because I wanted to bring my mom back to life. I'm sorry, I'm real sorry. I want mom to come back, but I can't. Wait. What? Bring your mother back to life? Who told you that? Who told you there was a way to do that? I did. I killed the brat's mommy about 5 years ago, back when I was still alive. They called me a serial killer. I traveled around hunting, killed 8 people. They even talked about me on TV. I was famous, a real celebrity. The kid's mother was my final score. She was sweet. I stabbed her 12 times, and she still ran away bleeding, trying to protect the kid. What a sight! It was beautiful. I get chills remembering it. You sicko! Then it all turned sour. I chased her onto the balcony and finished her, but the brat grabbed my shoelaces. I lost my balance. Man, did that suck. Really spoiled the moment for me. And to top it off, instead of me killing the kid killed me. So I decided he should suffer. I sucked out his soul and stuck it in the parakeet, and then I made a deal with him. Run from me for 3 months. If he did, I'd bring mommy back to life. Bring her back to life? Is that... Of course not, you moron! I just told the little chump so that he'd play. Worked like a charm, too! And I get the added pleasure of slaughtering everybody who tries to help him. They die, and the kid squeals. Don't kill them, blah, blah, blah. Then I remind him, Mommy's counting on you to save her. What a laugh! But then he's ready to go again. Gotta save Mommy. Pay attention, Soul Reaper. Your defense is pitiful. Okay, they're on you. You're deader than ectoplasm. What the? Here, you can have your friends back. Whoa. Aren't you gonna detonate them with your tongue? Go on, give us a whistle. Well, if you won't use it, then that tongue is mine. Oh, the tongue. These guys aren't hollows. They're parts of a larger entity, like a secretion. They have some consciousness, but don't feel pain. That has been Chapter 11 of Bleach. Let's get into doing a little bit of analysis. So yeah, obviously a few more developments. We finally get our connection here between the the hollow here, Shrieker, as well as the parakeet. We get a little bit more of a fight. We get to see Ichigo get a huge W. Pretty cool stuff. But let's get into actually responding and analyzing the chapter on like a little bit of a deeper level, right? Talking about the art and the narrative and kind of how this builds. So, chapter 11, analysis and response. We start off where we left off, where we've got Shrieker, and he's just delighted that now he has, another tasty soul to devour, right? But he relents. He's saying that he screwed up. That whenever they split up, he should have gone after Ichigo because maybe Ichigo's the more delicious soul. So he's still confident in himself, but now having to deal with both of them, maybe he sees that this is a bit of a bigger undertaking. I like that we get the little tiny guys in frame with Shrieker. I like that a lot. Like we get to see their actual relative size to him. That's neat. Also, just talking about like framing and aligning, I think I like kind of how his text is aligned here. Not text. What I was saying is his face. We get this right to left read of the text, but then also Shrieker's positioned right, and then Ichigo and Rukia are on the left there. And again, talking about text alignment, though, it carries us diagonally down the page too. So again, more clever alignment. I mentioned the shading being kind of rough. You could start to see that sort of hatched shading. In some places being pretty clean, like here or there, but in other places, and like maybe on Ichigo's pants or whatever, but other places you see like there's some cross hatching or where it gets a little bit ununiform. So it's curious. We'll see that hatch shading a lot in Bleach again. It's interesting to see how that develops. But in general, the character line work gets a lot cleaner as Bleach goes on. Maybe that should be the spoiler section. But you could see whenever I talk about line work. So what I mean by that is how deliberate the lines seem, and typically higher quality line work is line work where you really feel as though the author's intent is 100% deliberate with how the lines are drawn. So I feel like maybe Kubo was going for a sketchier style in some of this. I mean, you could certainly see if you're looking at like manga that are around nowadays, like Attack on Titan and Chainsaw Man, certainly have sketchier line work compared to a lot of produced and published manga. But those are also coming from what you might consider relative amateurs in the field as well. And before this, I mean, Bleach had done a run of Zombie Powder and only got 3 volumes in. So, he's certainly familiar with making manga. It's just that he's still got this sketchier style. and like whenever I say sketchier style, I mean that like his lines feel a lot less uh, wholly intentional. So you can see that especially on the way that Ichigo is drawn here, um, and that like some of this cross hatching feels, you know, like especially here on the neck where it feels pretty uniform, but here it gets a little muddied up. It doesn't have that same uniform state. Here we have some overlapped lines and a little bit of, you know, where like this feels like it intersects this, so it makes like kind of a double hatched area that maybe doesn't work as well. But even more so, I think you can see that especially in the face lines. So like here, this line has a little bit of a break in between it, so you can see like maybe this took 2 strokes. And certainly here, this feels like it's multiple strokes to make this line of the face. You can see that there with like that little tiny split. If we really zoom into it, you know, thinking about how many pen lines that took, that's very clearly like I want to say at least 3 because we have this line here that's the outer line, that one and that one. And so, like, while that can be effective and while that can be done, obviously it's done intentionally. I mean, like, he put his pen to the page and drew that several times, right? The thing is that whenever you're doing art, it's generally accepted that you want, whenever you have stronger line work, right, quote unquote, um, you're able to get the line quality and depth that you want out of a single like press of the pen, whatever pen you're using. So you can vary, you know, obviously you're like, well, what if I want a thicker line? Well, then, you know, you're going to have to either use like a full inked in, kind of like how Rukia's hair is handled. Um, but then you also just vary how strongly you press the pen to the page. So you can do this on your own, right? If you take a pen across a page and you press harder versus lighter, you can do this with a pencil too. You'll get a softer or a harder line. And that line variance and being able to control that line variance to your own ends can often make the quality of the thing that you're doing, especially whenever you're aware of how to use that line variance, it can make it vary and make it stronger. Like I think here, you know, we we see like this especially like this being a lot like harder stroke than the other side, where that variance isn't really working as strongly to define the outline of Ichigo's face. Whereas here, this connection here on the chin, it being like thicker here, typically where you want lines to connect, you want there to be like a bit more thickness to pronounce that connection, right? Um, so here in this connection, it getting a little bit bolder here and then thinning off as it goes down. And you see that here, but it's not so much in the connection. You see that following it thicker as the line goes through and then thin out. I mean, obviously, you want lines to like kind of taper towards rather than get thicker towards, unless you know it's in the state of like, for instance, these eyelashes or eyebrows, right? I say eyebrows. Um, the eye, right? Especially the top eye line, how he thickens it intentionally near the end, um, here and here, to kind of give you the impression of where there's a little bit more of like the plane of the face and how that falls and that kind of sculpts the brow. So again, you know, try not to get too technical with like art stuff, but basically what I'm putting all this out for is that early Bleach, you'll see a lot where Kubo especially has line thickness where it doesn't feel like he has full control over it, or he isn't really completely kind of mastered that the way that he wants to vary his lines, especially whenever it comes to the shading. But those elements are still there, and I don't think I wouldn't even call like I think his art I wouldn't call amateur by any standard, even in early Bleach. I think it's certainly stylish and really cool, and I think a lot of people lament a lot of the style in early Bleach getting kind of I say made more mainstream as the series goes on. But like at the very least, they like there were people that were drawn to that kind of early, especially angular, especially sketchy style, uh, and seeing that kind of fade more and more away as Kubo developed as an artist, maybe some people miss that. Certainly, I think there's an appeal to more amateur kind of art. It feels like immediately maybe a little bit more relatable, or like in a way, more like it could be cooler in some ways, if that makes sense. Like whenever things have too much polish, like there's there's an appeal to like super polished art. I mean, look at maybe compare and look at something. I'm trying to think of something that we have nowadays. Like if you look at some of the art for Dr. Stone, for instance, and you compare it to something far sketchier, like I said, like look at like Chainsaw Man, or look at Attack on Titan, especially. Like especially the early chapters of Attack on Titan. Oh boy, like you could see the difference, but both of them have their own appeal. So it's not like it's like one's better than the other. It's just like, what are you going for as an artist? What are you trying to convey? What's the aesthetic that you want to shoot for? And I think this aesthetic really works for Bleach early on. And so a lot of people that like really liked early Bleach, I totally get whenever they say that they miss this aesthetic. I don't think that aesthetic works so much for later Bleach, which is why I appreciate those changes in style. But we'll get there when we get there. Anyway, I like that. Again, we get Rukia pulling on the glove. Very cool shot of our two protagonists kind of getting ready for battle, and Shrieker big exclamation, huge chunky brush strokes here for the text. This is, I don't know if we've seen the brushstroked text yet in Bleach. If we have, I've totally mentally glossed over it. But we'll get that certainly going forward, and I think that's a great way to highlight like a really expressive, shout or whatever. Um, as I've pointed out before, Kubo's really like experimenting early on, kind of how to use text bubbles and how to convey different things, and like you could see certainly a familiarity growing with like, okay, I like doing this style versus another or whatever. But overall, I think the bubble formatting and the text formatting in Bleach tends to be pretty good. Not just the lettering, which I mean that's up to the translation team, but where the text falls on the page and how it's stylized as far as the text bubbles go. That's important stuff. I mean, it's really, again, I think that's one thing that's super easy to overlook in comics, but it can make or break the sequence of how your eye flows to the page, how you read certain stuff. So here we're reading left to right, and then we get this fully diagonal text that helps us move through the page as we read. It draws our eye because it's literally what we have to look at to get the narrative context beyond just the visual context, right? So that positioning, I mean, I think is intentional. I think again, early on, whenever I talk about like, I don't want to call it Kubo amateur at all because clearly he has a good sense of how to present his manga. More so than even a lot of people who've been doing manga for a long time, and even some of the top manga in Shonen Jump, like, still don't get that right. So I really appreciate it here. I think another thing I really appreciate that Kubo does a lot is that like he never goes too crazy with his panel layouts. And I think, having having an amount of like control over the panel layouts, or having a lot of like, just expressing restraint whenever it comes to that, keeping that structure is incredibly important. So there's times whenever you should keep structures, and there's times whenever you should break structures. And the few times whenever those structures get broken, it can be really effective. Not to talk about any in Bleach, but like, I mentioned Chainsaw Man before, and I think one of the few times pretty early on whenever one of those structures get broken is whenever a supernatural ability gets used at one point, and it literally comes from out of the panel into the panel. I think things like that can be really effective, but they're more effective if you're not breaking those structures constantly, right? You could draw more attention to them. And so, again, I think Kubo really keeps like a tight knit panel structure, and I appreciate the manga for that because some manga like love to just go all out with like text flying between panels and effects and stuff like that. And I think Bleach tends to have more refinement in that regard. Lots of use of speed lines. Fucking loving it. I mean, it's to draw attention and to build action into different directions, right? again, stepping on Shrieker's head, we get a return to that. So we have this idea of Ichigo not really being, like one being kind of super cognizant of Shrieker in his head, but also being quick enough to like, run around him. Here's too slow, right? So I love that Ichigo has picked up Rukia, who is also carrying his body. So it's like all three of them, uh, little stack as he hops over Shrieker, and I love that transition to like, again, talking about positioning and paneling. Here we have Shrieker middle panel. His head gets knocked down, so it's like it's literally what we have here, but pushed down by Ichigo's foot. Like that's the action there, and then pushed left and aside as we turn the page. You know, and we have again Ichigo's foot still framed, but him coming up out, stepping out of here, and then it's really like having the Shrieker's head and him looking over the shoulder as he turns around into, of course, Ichigo coming down with this huge slash. I think that's fantastic. Like that action, like of those 5 panels, and like implementing the turn page into that, having a really cool moment for the protagonist, having like a rebuttal and like an attack after we've had so much of Shrieker being on the offensive. Fucking beautiful, fantastic stuff. Like awesome. And again, speaking of breaking the paneling and that restraint, this I think very importantly, this slash is meant to be like a very powerful transition of the exchange that we've been getting through the whole battle where Shrieker's been in control, right? So to punctuate that, of course, we have slash across the page, Kubo really loving his sound effects early on, and that even breaks out of panel and a little into the other panel. So it's not as huge as dominating it. Not like in the first the first chapter where Ichigo yells and breaks the Kido, right? And his yell travels from like the side of the page, like the all the way into the break, which can be distracting as you're trying to read the paneling. Here, we don't get the slash really until we're done reading this panel. We only get the little bit of it, and it makes it that much bigger. So again, like using these techniques, knowing whenever to break your your restraints, but also knowing how to use them effectively. I think that really sells it. So, cool stuff. And again, talking about that line work and that sketchiness, I mean, look at how sketchy the Zanpakuto is drawn, especially the blade here, where like there's not even a single line that actually like deliberately goes across it. It becomes completely broken right here, line wise. Like, I think that could be way cleaner, right? Especially with how lightly this line is drawn. I feel like that line should be a lot heavier. The distinction between the blade and where it starts to connect to the hilt. So, again, there's like a sketchiness there that I don't think it's, there's maybe a purposefulness to a little bit of it to show like that downward momentum of the slash. But the blade itself should maybe be drawn with a keener edge here, especially gets rough near the ends, right? This is the sort of like, whenever I talk about more amateur parts of the art and parts where the art definitely like grows, I think that's exactly what I'm talking about. But as far as like character depictions and their expressions and things like that, that's also something that he's had. That's one of his stronger points that he's had from the beginning. So yeah, need to see that kind of stuff. Here we get the chapter cover. Tatsuki and Orihime on the steps, just enjoying some. I assume those are like crepes with ice cream, or just ice cream cones in general. The crepe with ice cream is definitely like a bigger thing in Japan than it is elsewhere in the world. Like that sort of treat. And strangely enough, I always see it in a lot of media, like associated with like girls going out and getting a cute treat. So that's why I immediately read it that way. But this could just be getting ice cream cones together. Who knows? But anyway, it's like a cute little, like, again, establishing these are their, like, this is Orihime and Tatsuki have this friendship. I really love the hair, like the braid and pulled back look that Orihime has. Really shows off her hairpins as well. It's a very, very cute look. And in general, I love Orihime's like long skirts and the little patterns that they get to. Tatsuki's looking great. Love the kick jacket. Yeah, just cool costuming in general. But I mean, that again, that's a lot of what Kubo was doing with a lot of these chapter spreads, right? These chapter art bits. So yeah, we get that he's drawn a little bit of blood, but that he hasn't quite, he's just sort of nicked him. But whenever he says he's a real Soul Reaper, I think the idea is like not that he's like, not that he's like a temporary Soul Reaper, because he is. Like, I mean, he's not like a real went to Academy Soul Reaper, but he is a Soul Reaper in the fact of the idea that he's going to like embody these powers and fight him, give him an actual fight. Unlike Rukia, who's kind of stuck in this gi guy, right, and can't quite manifest in the same way as a spiritual body, with the same powers, the Shuhakusho, which is like the whole get up as in the Zanpakuto. Now, whenever I talk about cleaner lines for the sword, here we do get that thicker line for the connection of the hilt, the scabbard, not scabbard, just the hilt, and we get a very clean line here, like a singular clean line, gets thicker near the ends, because it's going to intersect with the page line. I think that works there. It also draws the eye out for the sword. So whenever you get thinner towards the ends, that like lets you mentally make the connection. Okay, this is tapering towards this end. Whereas whenever you draw it thicker like that, that draws the eye out towards that thickness in some ways. So it gives us the impression of like, man, Ichigo with this cool huge sword that can't even fit in panel, and of course as our eye gets drawn out that way, we've got this kind of huge smoke gust of wind sort of deal to wrap us back around, to catch this whole cool scene showing off our main character just being a real badass, right? It's a cool moment. And really, I think I may have read this in an interview, but I think ultimately that's what Kubo wants to draw. He just wants to draw really cool character moments, and a lot of the narrative and other stuff ends up being ways to get to those cool moments, So I think as far as drawing cool characters doing cool things, certainly succeeds, and we see a good bit of that in this chapter. Like that we're reminded of the little leech monsters, and so that of course visually reminds of this, and then we get to hear a little bit. That's where the dialogue goes. I had to restart this recording like 4 or 5 times because excuse me, not because I'm coughing, because I kept misreading this. I kept, because this is Ichigo talking, right? We get that as a continuation, where he's like responding with like bombs, but these text lines, they're curved towards Ichigo, but it's because we haven't gotten him directly talking. I think this panel, it's a little confusing at first because Punk reads so much like a line coming from Shrieker, maybe, I know, and then every time that I would come to this panel, I would not only I would read that as Punk's subconsciously, like him frustrated at Ichigo and Rukia, and then the second I'd start with the Yumi and Karen line crying, I was like, wait, that's not Shrieker talking. I think positioning Shrieker there in that panel, having the dialogue like that, doesn't necessarily work. It's effective because he's it's Ichigo focusing on this guy and talking at him. But I don't think, text-wise, it was a little confusing getting through it. I had to restart like 3 fucking times because every time I got here, I was like, kept thinking like, even though I was aware, like, no, Shrieker's not saying these lines. It's like just reading it naturally. It naturally felt like that was dialogue attributed to Shrieker, the Hollow, rather than Ichigo. So like, there's like moments like that like read a little awkwardly. I don't think that's entirely egregious, I think it's, that's maybe even more me than every single person's going to read it that way, sort of thing. I like that there is that focus on Shrieker, especially from Ichigo's perspective, or at least the perspective of maybe even Rukia looking around Ichigo here as we get a little bit of his Soul Reaper robes, his Shihakusho. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. But yeah, I love Ichigo being such a fucking punk guy, so crass in a way, saying he's a 4-star wanker. And then this guy, just, like, the idea of being like, you're a real fucking piece of work, you're a real dipshit, you really suck. He's like, yeah, well, this guy is going to eat you now, the person that you're deriding. So I like that back and forth. I think making Shrieker, making the Hollows more than just monsters, but these conscious kind of communicative threats really is effective. And I think that was a good decision from what should we call it, from Kubo. But I love that we get this exchange. We're expecting a little bit more of the action, right? Um, you know, if you want to see some action, you got to be the center of attention, whatever. Eyes on you, number one, etc., etc. I wouldn't be surprised if number one was playing in this sequence. Maybe I have to go back and watch the anime and see if that's the case. Sure, I didn't get all those lines right. It's been a hot second. Anyway, that's Ichigo's theme in the anime, if you're curious. If this is your first time. If you're not aware of what number one is, go listen to it. It's his theme. It's great. Any for way, I was going to point out the kind of cool thing is that, yeah, we are building this exchange between Ichigo and Shrieker. We're waiting for another physical exchange between them because now we've got this back and forth verbal exchange. Shrieker's we're ending on this line of eat you, and to build up the tension a little bit more, we page flip into, of course, a different situation where Chad's approaching. So our tension is built. Like we're built up for that clash of characters, and so by jumping to this other character and using the page turn to kind of build into that, it ends up being kind of an effective turn. Of course, here, Chad can only see Ichigo's unconscious human body as his spirit is taking on the hollow. And Rukia reminds us a little bit of that. I think she says that that Ichigo's fighting a demon. I think again, like the demon and monster, especially the demon stuff, gets dropped in the translation as we go along. But hollow. Obviously, Chad would understand what a hollow is at this point. So Rukia saying he's fighting a demon makes sense. And yeah, and then hop back, and it looks like, man, maybe the whole time, they've been fighting. And again, that page transition, we have Rukia reestablish that conflict that we just had a page ago, and then we hop back into that conflict. And so yeah, here we have Ichigo slicing these things in half. That's his strategy as he approaches. But Shrieker is like, hey, I could still even use their corpses and explode them, which I think is a cool little moment of like making this chain explosion. You also get a little bit more of his personality as he like howls with laughter at seemingly of defeating Ichigo. But Ichigo hopped out of the way in the last moment, comes down, lands the sword right on his neck, and then we get this wonderful exchange there, where he's quickly trying to figure out like what the nature is of their connection. And I like that he asked Shrieker, but we start to get the story from Yuichi, from the parakeet boy. So this is also another kind of important thing because we know that Ichigo's mom's passed away, right? And so we have this connection of like protagonist has a missing mother, and so does this other character, and then Rukia like really defiantly being like, "Who told you there was a way that you could do that?" Right? The implication being like, no, you can't bring these souls back from the dead. Like who would have lied to you? Who would have told you that? So we get like definitive, like, no, the dead are dead, which is important because this is establishing so much spiritual stuff. We're building this entire kind of world in a way, so we have to have certain rules built in too, and we can't like. As easy as it would be to just have a narrator or a character, like how Rukia did, like sit there and literally draw out a thing and say like, okay, there are hollows and there are pluses, and we soul reapers, we send the souls, like to explain something to a character or just straight to a reader. That's really like I think that's like way too simple and not as interesting or engaging. Whereas establishing the rules of your narrative through moments of conflict or through organic exchanges like this builds the world and builds the rules of that world in a more organic way. And so like a lot of authors will get away from just having to use narration to do that by having a character that's like learning things, that's like a fish out of water or new to the world. I think this is why isekai manga, where like a character is teleported to another world, end up being so popular because like I think it's lame because I've read way too much fiction and I'm not really into the power fantasy of, being spirited away or whatever and being awesome in this new world. But I can certainly see the appeal. But the idea of like it's such an easy character contrivance so that you have to have other characters explain how things work to the newcomer, right? Because the person reading the manga is also a newcomer to this world, so they need to understand certain things about the world. But it is entirely artifice. It's all narratively finding a way to express the world of the character, and just having another person explain it isn't that interesting, really. Having characters live through that and us as a reader pick up on these things through them being shown tends to be much more exciting, especially whenever you can do that in moments of conflict. And so if you can have those things like expressed through, especially in a manga or an anime, expressed through a visual medium, that's like probably perfect, right? Like us learning things visually is great. Us learning things through an exchange between characters in the world where it's not just a person explaining something, but like an actual heated exchange. I think that's also good, especially because we can get a little bit of character building moments. So we have like this real intensity coming from Rukia, as well as Yuichi kind of expressing how much like he really wanted to see his mother come back, and then he's really sorry that he can't, help them out because he has to help this Hollow because he wants to bring his mother back to life. And so we get a lot of insight into those characters as well as the world, and that's something we would have never got if a character was just explaining all this to us, right? So, as far as like, whenever you think about world building, if you're an author or if you're ever working on something, always try to express that in a more organic way. Whenever I say organic, like in a way where it's naturally sort of happening. Your audience is smart. That's the big thing. It's like you shouldn't underestimate an audience, especially whenever your audience is a community audience. They're going to pick up on stuff. They're going to learn stuff. If someone doesn't get it, they'll probably talk to someone online and figure it out, right? They'll get exposed to those ideas one way or another. So like, you can treat your audience with a certain amount of intellectual capability or like agency that you don't have to explain everything directly to them. Just tell your story. It's going to be more interesting that way. Uh, if a character like you don't have to have a character be like, we have magic in this world and we can shoot fireballs. Just have a character fucking shoot a fireball at someone. you know, like before Rukia used Kido to shoot a fireball at a hollow or to heal Orihime, we didn't know Kido could do either of those things, right? But the character just did it, especially with the fireball. She didn't have to even explain it. She just starts doing a chant, shoots the magic, right? So, like, I think that sort of thing is incredibly important. Like, just show us, just do the thing. Have it happen in a moment of conflict. Have it be interesting. Um, that's important. I think Kubo understands that to a degree, and certainly there's a lot of moments. I think Kubo certainly considers his audience capable enough to pick up on those things, which is why doing this analysis and doing this sort of deeper look at Bleach, I think holds value because not everything's spelled out. Because Kubo understands he doesn't have to take like several panels to explain the interactions in a battle are, how a power works to this, all these specifics. So much shonen battle manga, I think, just ends up so packed with like, ho ho, but I have this secret technique. Let me explain exactly how it works. And I mean, like we get a bit of that in Bleach, don't worry, but we also get a good deal of characters just doing the damn thing, and I really appreciate that too. Like, so not to dwell on that forever, but yeah, a great moment where we get to understand the rules of the world a little bit better, as well as these characters a little bit better. I think that's effective storytelling. I love also, here Kubo really could have just had just Yuichi with none of the bars, but I think having the bars framed here really kind of expresses, like, because Yuichi didn't have to ever be in a cage the entire time, but really expresses that he's trapped in this situation. Not so much that he's trapped in the birdcage, that like he's in this sort of painful and trapped sort of scenario and chooses to continue to be in that, you know? I think that's what's important. That's what we're supposed to be taking away, and the bars really symbolize that pretty strongly. But yeah, and I love, this cut in from Shrieker as he expresses that he's the one that said that he used to be this serial killer, drawn in a pretty unflattering way. Of course, we're not meant to really idolize this guy. I don't know why his knife is like wrapped up like that. Maybe to conceal it. I don't know. um. Anyway, not the first, not the last time we'd see somebody with a wrapped up blade, but very curious. Yeah, yeah. That this idea of him. Of course, we totally get Shrieker, unlike maybe the hollows that we've had before, clearly a disgusting, horrible sadist, even in life. I think that really sells this as like a true demented villain, whole and whole. Whereas I think that like juxtaposing that, especially against Acid Wire, um, you know, Orihime's brother in the previous arc, I think that's a great juxtaposition. So whenever I talk about using these familiar structures, so again, we have this familiar structure of like a hollow attacking and being dealt and interacting with like one of Ichigo's friends who's narrowly avoiding getting killed by this hollow, has an injury. Ichigo notices it. They realize something more is going on. They trail them. They get involved with the hollow. They start to fight the hollow while the friend gets kind of introduced to the fact of these hollows existing in this bigger world existing. Even though Orihime does have her memories erased, whatever. We'll see if that happens with Chad. But at the very least, that whole build up, that whole narrative structure is the same. But what's different here is one, we get to see Ichigo becoming a bit more competent as a Soul Reaper, as we've known that he's been training between that point and now. So we get to see a little bit of the payoff of that, which is really cool, like immediately. But then also we get the difference in character where we get, instead of a wholly maybe sympathetic character, we get like this absolute reprobate. So we can see how hollows vary in these different ways, and we can see how Ichigo might deal with an encounter with somebody who isn't, like genuinely remorseful or like, emotional about these things, but like just wants to hurt other people and wants to manipulate them. And so it's taking that same structure. So we have the familiarity to get into the story, but then changing these different things within that structure so that we could see different kind of outcomes or different ways it can build to something different. And I think that's fantastic. Again, I think one of the big criticisms Bleach gets is reusing these larger narrative structures, and the people that make that criticism they fail to realize that the point is like that's intentional and purposeful, and that builds to different ends. That's the whole point of it, And like, yeah, it could maybe narratively feel a little bit rote whenever it happens, like a little bit like we're doing this again. But I think what's important is realizing and trusting in the author to bring us to a different place, right? Not just to keep retelling the same story. And certainly, I don't think the same story gets retold much at all in Bleach. Like, I think we have a lot of parallels and we have a lot of, like I said, repeating structures, but those structures are kind of set up and dynamically build on and complicate the themes and characters and outcomes of these interactions in this manga. So, I think it's great stuff. I think it's a really good technique in writing. I could go on it forever, but we're at 43 minutes. We're not even done with analysis. So, yeah, we get a lot of this, and like none of this flashback had to be drawn in these pages whenever he's explaining these things. I'm really grateful that it is. You know, fantastic. Kind of like, oof. Yeah. And here, of course, the knife is uncovered. We get to see it. So I guess he did just have it wrapped up, maybe to conceal the blade. But yeah, interesting kind of development of, he was killed by this child. And so he quickly killed the child and then stuck his soul in the parakeet. and then maybe Yuichi's considered, continuing to be in the parakeet for that reason because of that deal. And I think also here Shrieker's kind of loudly proclaiming all this because he's trying to unsettle Ichigo, so that he can get out of this, intense kind of thing. I love here that we get Ichigo, we get a very, very strong reaction from Ichigo, and that's no surprise. I mean, his mother is dead. So this person, this Hollow, willingly using like the idea of bringing back someone's mother, is especially twisted. um, and I think that's the great thing. Whenever I talk about establishing rules within the manga, establishing the world, because it isn't a hot and fast rule, like, hey, you can't bring spirits back from the dead. I mean, hollows existing, spirits existing as they exist, that's all something that a lot of these characters are only going to discover whenever they die, right? So it makes sense that a kid who's like, whoa, there's monsters and I'm a spirit, like, might actually literally trust someone who's like, hey, I can bring your mother back, let's make this deal, right? Even though that person is just manipulating them. I mean, it's a kid, that's what they want, especially, is to have their mother back. They just, like, they lost the person that they loved most, that took care of them, like their whole world. So yeah, clearly that really disturbs Ichigo, and that gives Shrieker the opening. Say, pay attention, Soul Reaper, like that opening to knock his blade away, to grab some more of these little leeches out of his fur and throw them at Ichigo. And then I love this, where he's like, I don't know if the "you're deader than ectoplasm" works as a line, but this whole, like, I've got you sort of moment, again, a really great back and forth as Ichigo just punches straight into his mouth, like through the mask. Really awesome action moment. Again, reads great, right to left action. Uh, here, using, whenever we talk about more deliberate use of lines, here the sketchiness of the lines impacting there, that I think is fantastic, especially the overlap into the broader lines of the Shiakusho. That really sells this forward momentum, the strength of this punch as it's shattering these pieces of mask out. Um, the blurriness of the eye, like all of that, so much of that, and of course the speed lines that transition across. So there's so much going on in this panel that really sells the action, as well as it coming out of like this kind of really dire moment where we know that Ichigo is covered in these explosives, that he might just get exploded, that we have this zoom in on his mouth, and that the tongue and how it's going to explode, and then that transition to such a denial. It's a really triumphant moment, enough so that I love the Ichigo with this almost villainous grin, this real turnabout of like, yeah, aren't you gonna fucking make him explode? And I love, of course, using the shading and the panel cutoff line to hide Ichigo's eyes, to really focus on, this real victorious grin that he has as he's really turned it around on Shrieker here. And then we get that shot of his eye, and uses that entire, not just the extreme shading there, but also, just completely panel toning this gray for his skin and hair, and the white of the eye to really draw us to Ichigo having this extreme, his tongue is mine, right? Black and white is a pretty graphic kind of Ichigo ripping the tongue out of him. I think this could have been done a little bit better. I mean, I think the Ichigo ripping the tongue out part works well. I don't know about, exactly Shrieker's positioning. I think maybe the mouth and head should maybe be facing a little bit more there. But still, pretty cool. I mean, we know what's going to happen, so pretty cool moments for sure. They could have sold this moment a little bit more, especially using this much of the page to do it. But I think it works. I think it still works. Could have been better, but it definitely works still. And so yeah, we get the sense of like, okay, that's really been triumphant. I don't see how Shrieker's going to win this fight unless he's got like regenerative powers we didn't know, right? So cool stuff. Really learning Ichigo, like thinking on the fly and responding and developing his tactics in a lot of ways. So that's all awesome. Yeah, I love this insight. Look, these guys aren't hollows. They're just like creations from the host body from Shrieker. Assumably they grow out of his body, out of his fur and skin, which is a neat insight. Um, they have a kind of neat design, especially like thinking that they're like filled with leeches and stuff. But yeah, that's it for analysis. That's all I got there. If you have some other things that you'd like to talk about what's going on in the chapter, feel free to let me know. And if you have any insight or response to what I'm saying, always feel free to leave a comment. But we're going to hop into spoilers here, foreshadowing how this connects to Bleach at large. So if you're not looking for spoilers, go ahead and get out of the video now. If you're interested to see some of the connections that I'm going to draw to Bleach and later chapters of Bleach, feel free to stick around as we talk about the foreshadowing. So, getting into all of that, we have, again, a lot of this interaction there. I think there is, I talked about the art stuff and how that would develop in Bleach. Certainly, we see a lot of that kind of more deliberate line art and shading. We get a lot of that really intense shading in, especially the Lost Agents, like Fullbringer arc, as well as the Thousand Year Blood War. Again, I think the sketchier stuff, the more angular, sort of more amateur stuff, makes sense for early Bleach stylistically, because again, Ichigo is an amateur character. They're having these kind of rough battles. It's not as serious. I mean, it's still life or death, but it's not as grave, into the world sort of consequences as what we're getting later on. So I think it works, I think the development ends up working pretty well too. I love, Rukia. We'd see that symbol again later on Kisuke's cane, but the idea that they have these tools to push the soul out of the Gigai. Assumingly that's something Rukia could just do without the glove, but who knows? I like that, like they at least have a thing to use that for. I don't know if they ever use that on normal humans. Like, what would the use be? But maybe that technology exists at the very least, which is neat stuff. Here we get kind of cool moment. Ichigo jumping over Shrieker's head, telling me he's too slow. As we come to learn, Ichigo's Bankai power is being fast. He has super speed. He has condensed sort of power. At the very least, whenever he first gets his Bankai, which really, I guess, is more of him using his Quincy powers, but we'll get there when we get there. But at the very least, the idea of Ichigo expressing like a certain amount of speed over his opponents, of like this like too slow mocking line, that's great. The idea of Ichigo being quick enough to stunt on and like jump over this hollow another time, awesome. And then also, of course, this wouldn't be the last time that Ichigo just scoops and picks up Rukia. I love also having Ichigo's body there. I think that's just a great visual. But Ichigo, very quickly arriving on the scene, saving Rukia, we'd certainly see again, right? And in general, I think Kubo likes this idea of like Ichigo protecting this other character, especially women. I think less so that being a patriarchal sort of like, oh, main character, haha, he's the masculine ideal. I think it's more that like it's Ichigo kind of using this power to do the thing that he couldn't do whenever he was young. He couldn't protect his mom. He couldn't save his mom's life, right? And so being able to protect these other women that he has formed this connection with allows him to wield his power in a way that maybe lets him make amends with these times whenever he was whenever he was powerless in the past. So I think that's the point. I think that's the purpose, is having Ichigo be this protector. And I'm sure you could think like protector of the weak, haha, women are weak. I don't think that's the implication at all there. I think the point is to kind of put Ichigo in these positions where he's capable of really wielding his power to protect others, kind of, and I love that it's heroic, but it's not super like over the top. It's still very kind of not sketchy, but like it's not idealistic. I mean, like he has her tucked under an arm like this, right? So there's still certainly a bit of like a bit of, I don't know, like that Ichigo's attitude in his character, that it's not like he's like, oh ho, I'm Prince Charming. It's like, no, he's gonna get the job done. He's pragmatic about it, I guess, But yeah, again, cute Orihime design. Bit more reiteration of her connection to Tatsuki. It's good stuff. I mean, I love the way that Tatsuki's drawn there. I think they both have really cool shoes too, like their kicks. Yeah. You're a real Soul Reaper. It's like, no, not really, not yet, but still, cool moment. Um, I love this panel so much. I think this panel's great, and then the Doom, connecting back to it. I'm pretty sure that's the sound effect that Kubo had used for the first time Ichigo really showed up with his Soul Reaper powers and having that huge mist around him, kind of in the giant sword. This is really a revisit in a lot of ways to whenever he first manifested his powers against Fishbone D. So I think it's supposed to be visually evocative of that as well. But this wouldn't be the first time that we get a big triumphant, or the last time, whatever. We're gonna get a lot of triumphant images of Ichigo kind of having this swirl circle around him, big show off of sword, typically front and center, right? I think Kubo really realized early on, like, that's the key kind of visual I want for Ichigo, showing him as this powerful entity. I love how he looms in these other pages, so we get a lot of Ichigo really being, face forward. Like how messed up Rukia is, but she's still able to kind of assess the situation and inform Ichigo. And again, just great expressions for Ichigo this chapter. Yeah, I love Chad running the scene. Like he wants to back up Rukia. He wants to, still join in best he can, and he knows Ichigo went this way as well. So he wants to support his friends. It's great stuff from Chad. Again, we'd see more of that and him following Ichigo further into both Hueco Mundo and Soul Society, and I guess Soul Society again at the end. So Chad's real connection to these characters and his willingness to fight alongside them, even if he knows he's outmatched, I think that's really important. Maybe I'll go back to that Chad page as I talk about that. Like, I think one thing that a lot of people have as a takeaway for Chad is they feel like Chad's really underutilized. And I agree. I do think the Fullbringer arc should have had a lot more going on with Chad. I think Chad just doesn't get a lot of moments to shine later on. But I don't think it's particularly, like, it could have been handled a lot worse. And even more so, I feel like thematically, the idea of you being a powerful person, this character Chad being a powerful person, that he is this, this very strong, like, incredibly powerful human, but that he's in these situations where he's out of its depth, right? That he's, he knows that he has his allies that are stronger than him, and that he has, that, like, maybe he might not be able to contribute on the same level as them or whatever, but he's still willing to put himself in danger to be a part of the team, to show his support, both morally as well as physically. I think that's a through line throughout the entirety of his character, and we get to explore that in various ways, where we have moments where Chad is stronger and they're able to rely on him more, and times whenever he is weaker. I think going into Thousand Year Blood War, certainly we don't get the idea that Chad's going to be able to really hold his own against any of the Quincy. But the point is that Chad's following him in. I mean, like, yeah, there's like, oh, I'm doing this training so that I can be more, adept, that I'm not going to fall behind Ichigo, all that stuff. And I feel like maybe that doesn't work as well. But at least the idea of Chad always being supportive, always willing to thrust himself into this danger, especially with him aware that he is outgunned, but because he wants to, like, really have his friends back, because it's the morally kind of correct thing to do, like the lessons that he's learned from his Uplelo and all of that. I think that's fantastic. And I think that kind of narrative sort of arc of Chad sort of reconciling with, not being able to have the power to save the day every time, but still, like, that, like, he should still be there, is really important. I think it's certainly handled a lot better than, one of the quick comparisons I can draw is like with Dragon Ball Z, where so many of the characters become, like, kind of just yes men to Goku, right? in a lot of ways, Chad fills the same shoes that Krillin fills in DBZ, where it feels like he's just there to essentially job or like to lose to a strong opponent to establish how strong they are, right? Um, but Chad certainly has much more impression of his character. We certainly have, I think, a more dynamic character than what we'd ever see from Krillin in DBZ, at least. That sort of supportive friend comes across a lot more through Chad, I think. And like Chad's stoicism, as well as a lot of his other qualities and attributes, I think, come across. Whereas I think Krillin worked a lot better in earlier Dragon Ball whenever he was a little shithead, you know. Um, I don't know. As there's like I feel like so much of Krillin's character and a lot of the characters in Dragon Ball Z end up like really losing a lot of what made those characters interesting as it really kind of becomes the Goku show. But yeah, I mean, not to say DBZ is bad or anything. I think it certainly has its strengths, but as far as how it handled some of its side characters, I feel like could have been better. And whenever we talk about this sort of the same sort of parallels in Bleach, where we have these characters where it's like very much as Bleach continues to trend towards being this big battle manga with stronger and stronger opponents, and our characters, or at least Ichigo reaching higher and higher pinnacles of power. It's like, well, how's Chad going to be able to keep up, right? And without just having some bullshit, like complete Deus Ex Machina ass pull, like, oh, he just has this power that he always had, or he discovers some power. I think it's a lot more reasonable to have a sort of a character that realizes they're kind of being left in the dust, and that they're mentally struggling with that, and that they come to a kind of healthy conclusion of like the important thing is still supporting my friend and my ally and still having their back, even if it doesn't mean that I can physically do that. There's still something I can do. Yeah, it could be handled better. Yes, there are things that Chad could have done even in that scope that could have been really cool and could have given him some great moments in the later arcs that I think people would have been more fond of. But I still think that there's a lot more there and a lot more being done that people don't really appreciate nearly as much. Um, yeah, but it's cool to see those seeds laid this early with Chad, right? That he's rushing back to the battle, even though this is an opponent he can't even see. Uh, this isn't really a battle that he can really, I say it's not a battle he can participate in, but he's still willing to and still trying to, despite that. There's another kind of big thing, I like Ichigo realizing that he can escape this blast, and again his speed being shown off as well as his awareness of the sort of battle situation. Um, Also, it's a cool use of Shrieker's powers as well. I think that like establishing the kind of rules of these powers and then building upon them naturally, that's something Bleach does a lot, and I think a lot of people will criticize like, oh, this is an ass pull, it's a Deus Ex Machina, oh, this character just had this power out of nowhere. Whenever I think a lot of those comments tend to be negligent of prior existing rules that would have hinted towards, or like moments that would have essentially hinted towards these things. Again, like I said earlier in this video, Kubo doesn't spell out everything in the manga. He's not going to write how everything works. And therefore, a lot of things are going to just be shown and done that will be unexpected, but like I say will be unexpected, that like, they might be sudden, like Rukia doing a fireball out of nowhere. You could say, oh, well, Deus Ex Machina, at this point, we didn't know that Keto could ever be used for offensive, magic like that. I thought it was just the way of the demon was just binding and healing magic. What the fuck, Kubo? Bullshit. Right? Like, people could have that same sort of BS argument, but at the very same, like, light, Kiddo's been established that it's a core element of Soul Reaper powers, right? They go to school for it. She's gotten high grades in it, so she's pretty good at it. So therefore, she could probably have variable uses of it. And then the other big thing is that we know Soul Reapers exist solely to deal with hollows. So why would they have an entire magic system that's purely supportive and doesn't focus on combat abilities? So we have all of these rules of the universe that exist, all these rules that build into why this power might exist, and then whenever the power is revealed to us, it makes narrative sense. It's not a Deus Ex Machina just because it hasn't been shown yet, or it hasn't been explained to us in fucking a boring detail yet. And I think here this is another great moment where like we understand the power of the leeches. We know that he can use his tongue to make them explode. Um, and we just haven't seen this application of the power. And so us getting this new application of the power is cool. It builds a new level, a new moment of kind of of like just like detail or excitement to the fight, because it's complicating the situation for our protagonist, and immediately he's in danger, right? But also this ends up being one of the things that ends up turning about for him, because those leeches still being bombs, even if the host parasite thing is dead, if like the little leech creature is dead. That's why Ichigo can shove the leeches from a dead one into his mouth, and why it's still deadly, right? So, it's a cool turnabout that becomes dangerous for our character, but between his quick thinking, his quick reflexes, and his decisiveness, he's able to turn that into an advantage for himself. I think that's all awesome stuff. And I think, again, talking about like this, BS turnabout, right? I think that's, hardly BS at all. And I think throughout Bleach, throughout this revisited series, I'm going to try to debunk a lot of those larger ones. I know people love to complain about a lot of them, especially in the Thousand Year Blood War with certain Bankai. Um, and there's some of them that I feel are maybe a little less defensible, but people will say this all the time with like Mayuri, or with Nano's Shikai, or with like a lot of the turnabouts. Kenpachi using two hands. There's so many moments like of like, oh, okay, yeah, you just have the perfect power, the perfect thing to respond in here. This is BS. Why wouldn't it? Again, I think those arguments tend to really disregard a lot of the setup that is in Bleach, and tend to come from people who are just trying to find something to complain about, or who aren't reading so thoroughly. Um, and I think those sort of arguments get to continue to stay around, because there's people that they get a lot of enjoyment out of deriding something, out of not liking something, out of criticizing a thing. And I'm not here to criticize things. I'm here to celebrate stuff. I want to celebrate those moments. I want to celebrate the things that are strong about Bleach. I'm going to freely admit whenever this is, not firing on all cylinders, the weaker parts of it. But at the same point, I think that we should choose to spend our energy and our time enjoying things. That entertainment is meant to be entertaining. You know, so I will always focus on, I think, what Bleach does strongly, and I think I will try to a degree, come to the defense of a lot of things that tend to be criticized about Bleach, because oftentimes I find those criticisms to be pretty lackluster, pretty short-sighted, and generally parroted by people who aren't even familiar with the manga. So, we'll do what we do. Get off my my hill to die on here, as we get to the other big thing that I wanted to talk about, is this last discussion here, where he's trying to get this insight. And so here we get a little bit of the softness from Ichigo, right? We get a little bit of Ichigo not having a decisive killing power yet, but he still has kind of this investment or interest in others, as well as he's not going to just kill indiscriminately, even with a hollow as this vile. And I think that aspect of Ichigo would certainly get a lot more later. That he doesn't kill by Hua, right? He doesn't kill a lot of his opponents, because in general Ichigo wants to defeat an opponent but not murder them. We don't really get Ichigo willing to kill somebody until the Fullbringer arc. But yeah, again, I already talked about that, bring somebody back to life, and that being kind of a thing that couldn't be done. I mean, technically, you could bring a soul from Soul Society to the material world and then put them in a Gigai. So, there is that. There is certainly, I think the border between realms is not as strong, but certainly Soul Reapers, and especially Rukia, would want to uphold those rules, that division of the realms, right? So her being so intense about this is important. But moreover, the idea of not being able to bring somebody back is really important to Rukia because she's had to deal with so much loss, and her sister especially passing away. Hisata, maybe that's her name. Still not going to be able to remember it off the top of my head. There's a reason why I'm rereading Bleach. But yeah, Rukia bringing back her sister, or the idea that she can't do that. That like when people have passed away, you have to move on. I think that's kind of maybe informing a little bit of this. And then of course Cayenne, right? And maybe that rings a little bit true with Rukia if we're thinking about this from the angle of like her making this quick connection with Ichigo because he resembles Cayenne so much that like maybe this speaks to her of like, look, you can't bring them back, and Rukia realizing like, shit, like there is no way to really bring someone back, and maybe she's even a little guilty of maybe even connecting with Ichigo because of that connection she had with Cayenne and seeing a bit of him and Ichigo. It's curious to think about, for sure. But yeah, interesting to see, that he's been around as a hollow for 5 years or so. I talked about the rat blade and that being kind of a weird artistic decision, but as we would come to find, this is a lot like Ichigo Shikai. So I don't know if this is just a visual thing, if Kubo's just using this like because that's just a visual he likes, or if it was meant to symbolize something more. But I'm going to go ahead and read this on some real fourth level bullshit, so bear with me. Here is this serial killer who kills this mom, right? Ichigo's hesitating, and he's got a lot of conviction in this battle because mom murder's pretty close to Ichigo's home, right? Pretty important to him. This serial killer has essentially a miniature Zangetsu. Like that is, it's 100% Zangetsu's design. Let me go ahead to look at this. It's a knife. It's literally the same arc of the blade. It had the wrapping over it whenever it was all wrapped up in its Shikai form. It doesn't have any hand guard. It's literally a tiny Zangetsu. That's whatever shorthand you want. It's this guy's literally using Zangetsu to kill someone. And the same. This is almost. I have to wait till I get to the actual chapter for it. Whenever we see Ichigo's mom killed later by Grand Fisher. But this, if I'm not incorrect, this like clutching over the child. This, I swear, this is the same sort of posing that he uses for Masaki protecting Ichigo, like 1-to-1. And so the idea of, again, obviously it's Grand Fisher that kills Misaki, but really it's, Yuha Bach taking back the powers of all the Quincy, right? So that she didn't have her power that day, so therefore she was powerless against him. So the idea of, again, Zangetsu, this is some real stretching, some real maybe fourth level nonsense. But the idea that Zangetsu killed this woman, that it was the reason that she was done in while she was protecting her child, connects to Ichigo in the same way, because the idea is, of course, Zangetsu there is a manifestation of his Quincy powers, of Yuha's powers, rather than his actual Shinigami / hollow powers, right? It's instead a blade born of his connection to Zangetsu, which, as we come to learn, is, and I say Zangetsu, I mean Old Man Zangetsu, not the actual hollow Zangetsu, or the manifestation of white, maybe even Shiro, whatever you want to call him, Shirosaki, White Ichigo, Hollow Ichigo. He has a billion names. But real deal Zangetsu, that's not it. It's Old Man Zangetsu, as we come to find out, is the seed of Yawak's power that's within Ichigo. And so the idea of representing that visually in these vague ways is really interesting. Also important to note is that the mother here has very clearly has the same sort of hair that Karen has. And maybe a similar outfit to what Masaki was wearing whenever Ichigo got killed. So, not Ichigo, Masaki got killed. Oof. Anyway, pretty intense stuff. If we're to read that way. Insane to think about if that was meant to be a visual connection, but it's really hard not to at least read this. Because, like, why would he have a covered knife that looks identical to Zangetsu? And for Zangetsu to manifest in that same way? I don't know, it's like I said, it might just be Kubo having a design for a blade that he likes, and this being an early iteration of that design, and that the bigger cleaver that Ichigo gets being essentially just representative of a design that Kubo likes for a weapon, right? But curious that he puts it in the hands of a murderer that kills a woman protecting her child first, right? Right? Curious. And maybe, again, maybe that's like overlooking, like super reaching there, but I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments. Again, make sure to mark your comment as a spoiler if you're talking about spoilers. But yeah, because I don't want other people that are just reading this for the first time to come across your comment and get super spoiled on some of those big revelations. But yeah, it's hard for me not to read it a little bit like that, or at least not to think of that in a way. But again, I do like this kid grabs him by the shoelaces and that's what kills him, and then he tortures the child kind of post death, right? Um, in a lot of ways, again, and maybe conflating with Grant Fisher. Grant Fisher continues to torment Ichigo after the fact. Certainly doesn't trap him in the same sort of scenario as Yuichi, but this child being the one to kill the entity that killed their mother, certainly Ichigo fulfills that, and then later, in a way, Ichigo's like child, right? Gonna have a hard time remembering this name again off the top of my head, because I remember the Rukia's child. I think it's Ichika, right? Whereas Ichigo's, I think, starts with a K, but it's not coming to me at all. Anyway, Ichigo's kid is like a toddler, essentially. Snuffs out the last of Yawok's energy. So, kind of curious that, that maybe connects in a way. Maybe? I don't know. Very vague connection, but kind of interesting. Kind of neat. And maybe in a way, with the Hell arc, we might get to see how, you know, Ichigo's child might get pulled into something larger because of what he's done, or because of the outcomes of the Thousand Year Blood War. So curious, interesting. Anyway, yeah, obviously the mommy's counting on you bit clearly resonates with Ichigo, with his biggest failure being that he couldn't protect his mother, that he's internalized that a whole lot. I think that's an awesome connection to make there, and certainly fits not just what we've gotten so far in the manga, but especially as we come to learn more. Yeah, again, we get like this, like, your defense is pitiful, as like this criticism of Ichigo, especially with his hesitation on hearing that entire story. But Ichigo's never been about defense, right? I mean, whenever he finally manifests his Zanpakuto, I don't think we hardly ever get one that actually has like a guard of any sort. He wields his power against others, even though it's meant to defend his allies. He is just this blade pointed out towards the other. So kind of interesting. The criticism of his defense, I think, would hold fair for a lot of Bleach. He's very self-sacrificial, but again, I love that using his power, punching right into the mouth. Fantastic bit there. And again, like this trio of Ichigo with this great grin, really good, really expressive. Again, I think parallel with the trio of this focus on the one eye of Shrieker, just like a fantastic set of panels. Jeez. Anyway, Ichigo dismembering somebody or tearing parts out of them. Certainly we get more of that later. I think of, especially the battle with Ulquiorra, right? Doesn't he like rip off his arm or whatever? Something like that. Ichigo ripping and tearing certainly will come up later, is what I'm saying. So him getting in up close and personal, having that sense of like physically overcoming people, I think, and being quick enough to. And a lot of Ichigo's like badass top moments, like even thinking about him saving Rukia and just like physically, punching through Omeda's Shikai and palming and defeating the other two lieutenants. He's always had like these really quick moments of physicality, and maybe even brutalism to him. So that's kind of neat. Here we get the idea that like, yeah, the littler things aren't hollows on their own. They're not like spirits, they're just parts that have been cast off. They don't have a full identity. But already we're getting a little bit of the idea of like you can make a kind of conscious thing cast off from yourself. I mean, obviously we'd see that later with Stark. We'd see that later with Kenpachi. And that, those entities can have spirits if you're powerful enough yourself to really give a part of your spirit to them, and to manifest them in those ways. So that kind of cast off idea, that like, this larger entity can, create another consciousness, in some ways, is one that Kubo would continue to run with for both protagonist and antagonist. So curious to see it here first before all that, right? But certainly an idea that I think Kubo likes. Anyway, this has been chapter 11. Really, it's a longer video. I had a lot to talk about for this chapter, especially compared to last chapter. I mean, they're both big battle chapters, but maybe there's a little bit more kind of revelation and dialogue going on here than there was in the previous one. But regardless, really appreciate you joining me for this journey, for this extra long length Karakura Gold Bleach Revisited. It's been a good time, and I'm grateful for you watching this whole video if you have. As always, if you have any response to what I'm saying, if you want to chime in about anything, or if you have your own ideas about what's going on in this chapter, your own thoughts about anything, feel free to leave a comment. Let me know. If I pointed out anything that you aren't aware of, that if you learned something new or maybe had a new insight, please give this video a like. Let that represent you learning something new. And if you have things that I didn't realize, comment and let me know. I want to see your connections to the larger parts of the manga, or to like insights on what's going on in this chapter as well. This isn't just for me. I'm interested in what you got to say too. Anyway, as always, if you want to support me, I do have a Twitter and a Patreon where you can give me support. Should my Patreon start to get followers, I will also put a list of everybody that is supporting me there onto the videos at some point in the video, probably at the end here, just so that that I can represent that kind of goodwill. But regardless, as always, I'm at this point. I'm really grateful for the viewership that I do have. Please spread this, share it with your friends, any other fans of Bleach that you might have in your life. I really want to build excitement for Bleach. At this point, whenever I'm making this video, the anime is coming back. There's a lot to be excited for as far as Bleach goes. First chapter of the Hell Arc's been published. Hopefully, we'll get more of that. There's just a lot of momentum building for the return of this thing that I love, this property that I'm hugely into. So, if you're into Bleach, share the love, spread the love, build the excitement. Anyway, this has been Karakura Gold with Bleach Revisited. As always, spirits are forever with you. Stay gold.